Glad you're here, glad you're on the web. Sorry we're a little late. It was called air conditioning, now we have some air, so we'll get going on this. So what's surround sound? Anybody? It sounds like it's so easy. Yeah, it's sound around you. Question is, where does it come from? What are the formats? How do we get surround sound? That's what this whole thing is about. All right, now, and if you'll notice, what we're doing here, we're going to divide it up by theater and in the home and go by the years. What do you think happened in 1940? Talkies. Not quite. All right. Anybody remember that movie?
Yeah.
All right. Little story behind it. Walt Disney wanted to do Fantasia, but he wanted to incorporate classical music. Who was the principal conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra. He had been working, and he's a technological kind of guy as well, and he'd been working on stereo recording, which had been happening experimentally in the early 30s. Disney found out about it. He knew Stokowski. They got together, and Stokowski actually did the soundtrack for the movie for free. It was a way to really get the Philadelphia Orchestra more notice as well. Now, if you notice, how many channels? 5 channels, left, center, right, left surround, right surround. And you'll be seeing this throughout the presentation. LCR, LS, RS. RS, thank you. I'm so full of S's that it's... The movie came out in 1940. It did okay. They had to work in theaters and spend quite a bit of money to set up the systems, which were called Fantasound. There weren't a lot of theaters in the United States that got it, so they also had a print that was mono, which really is not as enjoyable to listen to. So in re-releases since then, they've gone back to finding the originals, and so if you ever get the movie on Blu-ray, make sure that it's the version that has the stereo soundtrack with the surround. How many of you are familiar with Cinerama? All right, this is something that when I first saw it in Minneapolis, where I was brought up, I went nuts. I loved it. Cinerama had a very deep curved screen. What do you notice up there about the red? We have left, center right, right, surround left. What did you notice about the film? 3 projectors. The first movie was This Is Cinerama. There were a number of other Cinerama movies. It really brought you into the picture. In some cities, they actually built theaters specifically for Cinerama. We had one in Minneapolis. Originally, they opened it in a downtown theater. It was a reserved seat kind of thing, showing it one evening. And then eventually, how many of you seen How the West Was Won? There were 2 movies, as opposed to documentaries, that were made with the 3 projector system. How the West Was Won and the Brothers Grimm. How the West Was Won in Cinerama is so much fun. That is another movie that's considered one of the 100 top movies of the history of movies. Sound-wise, again, look at how many channels. 7 channels. 1953, some of you have to remember this. The Robe was released. This was the first CinemaScope movie. Now, it was released in 2 different formats. One with surround, or additional channels. Most of you saw The Robe in 4-channel, but it actually had a 6-channel version on 70mm film. This is the one that most of us have seen. This is one of those movies, for me again, I remember the theater, I remember how I felt when I saw it. It was just that kind of movie. And here's what it looks like from the setup. How many of you have seen Oklahoma? In reading about Todd A.O. is two different things. It's the picture quality. It's a type of cinemascope, but it's 6-channel. So there we have left, center, and left, right as well with stereo surrounds. Now, or a surround channel. In reading about Oklahoma, because most of the theaters didn't have Todd A.O. gear, they shot the movie twice. One in Todd A.O. and the other one in CinemaScope. So there are two slightly different versions of the movie. And if you were to see them both side by side, you'll see Shirley Jones kind of acting a little bit different, and I forget the main star. That's more trivia, by the way, if you haven't figured it out. Now, all I want you to do is remember that name, Peter Schreiber. Working in his basement, he developed this matrix for having surround sound. How many of you remember the company Dinoco? All right, they made kits. You could build your preamp, your amplifier, your tuner. It was my second audio system. I got into this in the about the mid-'60s, and my first system was from Radio Shack, but then I wanted something better, and it was a Scott amplifier, which was one of the mid-price companies. So I thought I was smart, and I went and bought a Dynakit, preamp, power amp, and tuner, and built the power amp. Oh, I was brilliant. Built the preamp. I was great. Then I got to the tuner. You know, guys, we tend to think we know how to do stuff. And so directions, oh, who needs directions? So my wife had to finish the tuner. But Dinoco was started by a guy named David Hafler. And David had developed a very simple circuit to extract information from a signal, from a stereo signal. And that became the Hafler circuit, which also went into what was called a Dynaquad circuit. He was, again, behind, there's a Hafler company and a Dinoco, and he's behind both. And it was a way to extract ambient information from the stereo source without using an extra amplifier. You just hooked up a speaker behind you, and whatever it extracted went in the back, and it was very pleasing. And Dinoco actually came out with a little box that had a volume control on it, called the QD1, and didn't sell for much money. But you didn't even have to spend any money. You could just wire it up the way they recommend, and it was very pleasing. Okay, now I got into this business in late '67 when I worked at Bill K. Sound. And in 1971, why don't you take a look over here at the side, Sansui had come into the United States, started marketing stereo gear. How many of you served in Vietnam? Both of you probably brought back Sansui gear or Pioneer, and one of those, and certain speakers. I mean, it was typical. Sansui came into the United States about the same time as Kenwood and Pioneer. What Sansui had done was develop a circuit called the QS circuit. It was a matrix circuit. Now, if you notice up there, 4 to 4. 4 channels sent to 2 channels to the stereo signal, and then using a decoder extracting for additional information. That's one of the receivers. And if you notice, there's an up and down control. That changes level between front and back. It worked. It was my first experience in a retail environment. I thought, this is really neat. The problem was, Columbia, CBS Labs, decides to come out with a competitor. This happens to be a Fisher receiver that one of our guys happened to get last week. It couldn't have happened at a better time. It doesn't work, but it has a joystick on the front. That matrix circuit is called SQ. QS, quadraphonic stereo. SQ, stereo quadraphonic. Not compatible, but still, matrix, 4, down to 2, back to 4. The company that had the most discs, why don't you show Al, why don't you raise your hand? Al is also a collector, I've discovered. And he brought this album in. That's actually the quadraphonic disc for an SQ system. So you played your turns. Understand, this is all music. All right? We're not talking about movies. We're talking about surround with music so far. But to make things even more confusing, what came next? All this in 1 year. JVC brings out a discrete system using LPs. Now you needed a special cartridge. Cartridge is a thing with a needle in it. Because we have some people here who don't know what an LP is. We'll get there. You know what? Neil, why don't you hold an LP up? So to play this, we needed a cartridge with a needle or stylus in it. Not only did the cartridge have to be a new type of cartridge, but the stylus needed to have a specific shape, which was called a Shibata shaped stylus. It then,
He lets me on
yes,
camera.
Vanna. He works cheap. I'm sorry. So now you had the normal stereo signal in the groove, and then also put in the groove where the left and right surround. And the stylus had to pick all of that up. The signal came out of the cartridge to a device called a CD4, that was a system, demodulator. And then the 4 channels came out to whatever you were going to use for your preamp and amp. It worked. What do you think the issues were in a short period of time?
Media. Media record.
Well, the stylus and cartridge weren't inexpensive. However, are we dealing with wear? That was a problem. If the system wasn't set up accurately, you'd start erasing those other channels, and then it didn't work that well. So now, we have an industry that loves to kill itself. We have 3 systems. That's bad. Because as a retailer and as a consumer, what do? We had all 3. We had all 3. It failed after a few years. There wasn't enough software either. Here comes that Peter Schreiber guy again. He gets a patent for matrixing surround. Again, we'll get back into that as we move ahead. Sony, on the SQ system, the separation between front and back was 3 dB, barely enough. Sony worked with CBS, and they developed a full logic decoder that now gave you up to 20 dB and more of separation between front and back. Quite an improvement.
And if you're going to explain dB for every 10 dB, it's twice as lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of separation.
So it's a lot more separation. So 3 is noticeable, 20 is
Yep.
double.
Anybody remember Earthquake, the movie? This is another one of those movies I remember where I saw it. Broadway Theater.
Yep.
Yeah, and 2 huge boxes in the back corner. And again, only 3 movies used Sensurround. Never was a version for the home. This is where things changed for us. I went into business in October 1, 1975. And 1 year later, I was told about this new device that was going to be shown in Chicago at the Consumer Electronics Show. It was called the digital time delay, the audio pulse digital time delay. Well, after having been around the business for, by that time, 8 years, I'd learned about bull. That manufacturers tend to manufacture a lot of it. And I started learning to use your own ears. So I went to the show, and I couldn't afford hardly anything. I had this closet for a room. Went up to a demonstration put on by a gentleman named Burt White. Burt White wrote reviews for Audio Magazine at the time, and highly respected. Walked in the room, sat on the couch. He gave the background of the audio pulse digital time delay. He was playing music. He turned it on, and I almost fell off the couch. Sat there a while, asked a few questions, left. Because one of the things that I discovered about myself is if I'm really impressed a lot when I first hear something, there may be something wrong. Have any of you ever run into that? There's something that's getting your attention. In this case, I wasn't sure if it was real for me. So the next day I went back. Oh man, I want one. Problem was, I'd been in business less than a year. It's called money. This was the first digital device for the home. Sold for $750. How much would that be today? A lot more.
2,000.
Yeah. You also needed an extra amplifier and a set of speakers for the surround. So I'm talking to the representative, who we still do business with today, and I said, I want one, but I don't know if it's going to sell. And he goes, okay. He said, if you can't sell them, we'll help move them. He had to order 4. 2 months later, I think it was, I'm doing a demonstration in the original store, which was one room. And there were some people in the store, and the truck pulls up and brings a box in. And I said, wait, to the customers. And we quickly ran some speaker wire, hooked it up, and we're going to play one for you now. And then I'll tell you what happened. Remember, music first. We're going to play something most of you are familiar with. We will turn it on and off. And by the way, we'll be using this, hang on just a second, this clip speaker, that one, and then there's a pair of small clips in the back. Those of you back there, you're going to notice the difference when you turn it on and off. You're going to hear too much on the ends here, but you'll get the idea. The whole idea here is to recreate the sonic characteristics of a hall, jazz club, or whatever.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
You heard noise? Now, remember, 1976. To me, that's impressive. So, anybody who came in the store, Don is one of them, Anybody who came in the store at the time, they got a demonstration. I get a phone call about a year later from the guy behind the company, who I'd known for a long time. He'd been at Advent Corporation, and so we knew each other. And we both loved movies, we both loved music. And he calls and he says, "Bjorn, what are you doing down there?" "What do you mean, what are we doing down there?" He says, "You're the largest dealer in the world." This is a 1,000-square-foot store, the size of our counter, by the way. And I said, "Let me guess. The dealers you have, put it on a shelf and talk about it." Well, I was the only salesman for a while. Everybody has to listen to this.
Your store.
And so, and by the way, we were back ordered for months. We started doing some simple install work at the time, and so any house that we went into, we would recommend that another pair of wires would be run for surround. So for us, this was the beginning of surround. The other thing that happened, this has traditionally, till recently, been a guy's business. Would you agree with that? Yeah. Your wives and girlfriends probably did not enjoy coming into stores like this. Why? Because we force them to go, "Which one do you like, honey?" And they don't care. They don't. Most of them.
They just go by the jewelry.
I'm not getting there. So they go by the jewelry.
It's across the street.
So, what I found is that I would have women coming in and buying this device, plus the amp, plus speakers, which ended up being about $1,200 for the accessory, and buying it and giving it to their mate for a birthday present or Christmas. That had never happened before. Because when they listened, it wasn't a question of which one do you like, it was, do you like it or not? And most people liked it. So, did all of you hear when we were turning it on and off? Okay. That's a, what, 50-year-old unit? Or 40-year-old unit? The first one we hooked up burned up, by the way. So. Then, this movie comes out called A Star is Born. It's the one with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson, but it had something unique. It had a what's called Dolby Stereo. Most of you thought it was Star Wars, didn't you? The first movie with Dolby Stereo? No, this was really the first one. And if you notice, left, right, surround, 3 channels. Did not have a hard center channel. It had what was called a phantom center channel that if you're sitting in the appropriate spot, you'd perceive the dialogue coming from the center, even though there wasn't a speaker. It worked okay. Then, and here's an example of it. Sorry. And then the biggie came out. I think everybody's aware that this movie, they didn't think was going to be really big. And again, this is one of those movies I took my daughter to go see. I took off of work and walked out of the theater going, "Oh man, this is really great."
John Williams.
Oh, shoot.
Bjorn, and just as an example, I'm going to show
Oh,
the-
yes, I'm sorry.
I
We
didn't know,
forgot.
So this is the Dolby Surround matrix, that's from the stereo. So you have a stereo amp matrix.
Then another movie came out later, a little bit later, and it added a subwoofer channel or low frequency effects channel. Again, on the left, it's all related to the theater. Then something happened that now could bring surround home. The VHS cassette with stereo and a stereo VCR. And then a decoder plus another amp. Those could be together. And now we had a stereo, left, right, but matrixed in was the surround channel. That was Dolby Surround at home. But as always, VHS, I never watched a movie on a VHS because something else came out at about the same time with a far better picture. To give you a number, the lines of resolution on a VHS was about 240. Lines of resolution on a Laserdisc is about 400 plus. That's a lot. So, 1978, we'd been in business 3 years. We had the audio pulse. We decided, and I was carrying a line of projectors. Remember the 3-tube projectors? From Kloss, K-L-O-S-S, and which was a 6 or 6.5 foot curved aluminum screen. We decided to take a Laserdisc player, which we didn't carry. It had just come out in Atlanta, Georgia, at Rich's department store. And that was the original release city. So I called them and I bought a Laserdisc player and I said, send me every movie you have. So they sent 10 discs. One of them was How to Stop Smoking. I didn't need it, but anyway, that was one of the discs. But one of the discs was a movie that I just recently seen, or about the same time. And again, it flipped me out in the theater. It's called Apocalypse Now. What we did was incorporate a stereo, front channels, amplifier, preamp, the audio pulse, a rear channel amp, and speakers, and hooked up the Laserdisc player to it. That's what you're going to hear now. And this will be Apocalypse Now, and we're going to be playing the section that we found that helped move this whole thing forward. And again, we're not decoding. We're simply adding the sound of a hall or something. All right.
Shall we dance?
This unit is not perfect, so. A lot of you have
Quick thank you.
a working unit doesn't have that ringing. How was that? Again, 1978, 79, 80, something like that. When all we've been listening to is stereo movie, a few there were at the time. Now, about the same time, the no, that's fine, just leave it. The Fosgate tape decoder was released. We were a Fosgate dealer, and it actually was a quad synthesizer. It could take stereo information and put it into 4 channels. It was a very interesting device, and for its day, it sounded really good. Now, Apocalypse Now comes out in the theater. The Laserdisc came out a little bit after that, and we were on our way. Now, how many of you remember that there were 2 disc systems? Okay, it was called CED. I've got an example of one over here. Okay, this took 2 discs. And what you would do is capacitance electronic disc. This was developed by RCA. They spent $580 million developing this. It came out the same time as they released Laserdisc machines in this market. So we took on both. 2 weeks later, we had one system, which was a Laserdisc system. This uses, when you put the cartridge in the machine, it would grab the disc and play it with a kind of a stylus. It was really old-fashioned, yet they spent all that money. So it went away almost immediately. And Laserdisc became the format for people who cared about picture and sound. It was very exciting. When I went to see Apocalypse Now, I actually snuck away from work for 3.5 hours to see it in 70 millimeter with 6-channel surround, and it was spectacular. Have any of you seen the documentary called Heart of Darkness, which was done and showed, I think it was his wife shot it. They did a documentary, and it's available on disc. It's unbelievable what Coppola went through to get this movie made. And again, it's one of the 100 movies of the whole time we've had movies. All right, then one of the complaints of the Audio Pulse and similar devices, ADS and a couple of other companies came out with digital time delays as well. When Audio Pulse went out of business, again, they couldn't get traction in large stores. That was a problem because large stores at the time wouldn't demonstrate. Does that change? I don't know. And so eventually Audio Pulse went out of business. We were so ingrained with doing surround that we went looking for anything that we could get our hands on, including used Audio Pulses, then took on ADS and KOS, remember the headphone manufacturer? They made a device. And if we had a used Audio Pulse, the customer knew they were getting a used audio pulse, but it was that important to us. And we have an ADS there with, this is actually a White Labs, but Mr. White was the guy who designed the Audio Pulse, and when they went out of business, he bought the rights and built. My understanding, that may have been Austin, Texas. So, 1984-85, Yamaha, the first major manufacturer to get behind surround, from the standpoint of, for music, and then it had Dolby Surround, so the 3-channel Dolby Surround circuit. So what was different about the digital time delay? They actually had gone out to specific halls around the world, including Carnegie Hall, jazz clubs, and measured the sonic characteristics, and that's what's in the unit, and you simply pushed a button on the remote and you were in that hall. You could adjust various parameters as well. The bottom unit is an updated version that came a year or 2 later with additional amplifier built in, so you just added speakers. Then, Finally, Dolby comes out with Dolby Pro Logic. So now they've gone from 3-channel to 4-channel. So this shows it in a home configuration, but in the theater, you'll have a left, center, right. Center is for what, primarily? Dialogue. Heart, center. And then in the theater, you'll have all the speakers on the right side, all the speakers on the left. Guess what? They're playing the same thing. Mono, and they rolled off the high frequency content above 7,000 to 8,000 hertz. But it was a huge improvement over the early Dolby Surround. Then Batman Returns comes out. The first movie, did I miss something? No, the first movie with Dolby Digital. So from 87 to 92, we had Dolby Pro Logic. We had Dolby Pro Logic at home. And here are 2 examples of how, because there weren't receivers initially with Dolby Pro Logic with all 4 channels. So the bottom unit is an NEC that has the rear channel amps in it, plus some additional stuff besides Dolby Pro Logic. And the top unit, one of our customers brought it in late last night. That's a ADCOM amplifier, multiple amps, with Dolby Pro Logic decoding that you simply added to your stereo system, and then added the speakers and you were cooking. So Dolby Digital, what's the big improvement? The surrounds are now stereo, full range. It's a discrete system, and they added another channel. It's 5.1. 5 full range channels. So left, center, right. Left surround, right surround. Full range stereo. But the 0.1 channel is a limited bandwidth low frequency effects channel, LFE, sent to a subwoofer. Maybe multiple subwoofers. And here's the theater. So, I mean, it's pretty explanatory. Now, look, notice they have rear speakers, but they're divided in half. It's right channel and left channel, but it's still all of that or all of this. All right? That's basically what's in the theater today, the majority of theaters. But they can't leave it alone. Jurassic Park comes out, a Spielberg movie, and they wanted to go with a different system. So Spielberg helped finance DTS, and they brought out DTS 5.1. The alleged advantage, and I'm not going to get into an argument over this, is that it has greater dynamic range. There's more information in the signal, but we now got into a little bit of fight, although today it's a meaningless fight. And then a third system for the theater comes out. Sony brings out SDDS, Sony Dynamic Digital Sound. And Last Action Hero was the first one. So what did they do? They add a left center and a right center behind the screen, and everything else is the same compared to the other 2 systems, Dolby Digital and DTS. Any questions about this one? This never came into the home, thank goodness. It's a very good system. That's not the point here. It's a very good system, but again, it would add more confusion. But now, when did we get 5.1 at home for the first time? I wish I had the disc. This happens to be a movie that I liked a lot. It's Harrison Ford, Clear and Present Danger, on Laserdisc. And an interesting story, at least for me, is that we did the first retail public showing of Dolby Digital 5.1. I arranged with Yamaha to, first, we needed a disc. We already had Laserdisc players, but we needed the decoder, or the device that you added to the machine so you could take the signal. And what they did is they shipped us the additional products one place, and they were locked up, and then they shipped the keys separately. They were paranoid about the stuff getting stolen at the time. And we had a seminar for our consumers, and we showed 5.1 for the first time at the old store. And again, the main thing here is left and right surrounds in stereo, full range, and then LFE, low frequency effects channel sent to the subwoofer. By the way, how many of you first have a surround system? Okay, virtually all of you. How many of you have a subwoofer? How many of you have two subwoofers? Okay, just so you know, in the same room. Just so you know, keep this in mind. One large subwoofer versus two smaller subwoofers. What would be better? Yeah, because of the placement of subs is critical, fairly critical. Have you ever walked around the room and found that there was more bass in one area and hardly any bass in another area? That's because of the way the waves work in the room. With two, you can place them and have better bass throughout the room. Another bit of trivia. All right, we're moving ahead. All right, how many of you remember TMH 10.2, our 12 channel? All right. I hired Tom Holman, who, by the way, is a TH of THX. I've known Tom since the 70s, and Tom worked for Lucasfilms for many years. And while he was there, he developed the THX standards. Well, he's a believer in more channels. So about it was 96, I get a phone call from his assistant, and he's a college professor of film at USC. And the assistant says, Tom would like you to come to a demonstration of this thing. And I said, we can't. This was in Vegas for the Consumer Electronics Show. And she said, Tom really wants you to come. I said, I can't. We're totally booked. They were off-site somewhere. Finally, this is what got me. Only 40 people had been invited during the 4 days. So, we went over early one Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, and they're in this hotel room. And Tom starts telling us about this research that they've been doing, that more channels gives you a more realistic sound. And he says, now we're going to walk into the next room where it's set up. And it was a bedroom in a hotel suite that everything had been taken out. You couldn't see anything because there was black transparent cloth around the whole room and 3 chairs. And he says, okay, I'm going to turn off the lights. I want you to just close your eyes. Now, I have a little problem. I'm a little claustrophobic. He shuts the door and I break out into instant sweat. It makes no sense at all. I know I can get out. The sound comes on and I'm okay. And he played for us the 12 minutes that a lot of you heard in our Ultimate room. About a year or two later, I asked Tom if he and his partner would bring the system to San Antonio so we could demonstrate what the future could hold. And in the old store, we demonstrated it. And then when I hired Tom to do the acoustical and design of the Ultimate room here at the store, he called me one day and he says, how about putting in the 10.2 system? Okay. I'm a sucker for that sort of stuff. And so we had the only 12-channel system in the world in a retail environment for 15 years. Specially recorded material. How many of you heard it? I know a number of you did. And if you tell me ping pong balls, I know you heard it. It was phenomenal. But times change, and we'll talk about what changed. Here's the speaker hookup, speaker arrangement. left, wide, wide. You have your three main channels, left, center, right, then width channels and height channels, and then notice just one surround, back surround, and then right and left surround. And then he was a believer in two low frequency effects channels. So in that room, we had the two channels with total initially of 3 subwoofers per channel, so we had 6 in it. It was a big room. It was installed in some commercial locations, but again, it was more an experiment than anything else. All right, 97, big deal. The DVD comes out. I think you all know what a DVD looks like. Looks like a CD. By the way, just for grins, James had the original Sony CD player, but it doesn't work. I was going to use it, but it doesn't work. It was $1,000. Okay.
I still have one in the works. Bought it here,
Yeah.
$1,100.
Yeah.
Can't get a deal.
Sony CDP 101, and then Mitsubishi had a similar model called the 101. It was totally different, but those are the two first players on the market. And again, changed everything. Yeah.
It plays formats that my other one, cheaper one, doesn't do.
Yeah. That's a good point. How many of you have had the difficulty? You'll get a new disc and you'll put it in your machine and it has a problem playing it. The reason? The specs change. The machine is built at a certain time with whatever the specifications are for the format. And then as the years go by, the format specs change. But your machine doesn't. Now, machines today, a lot of them come and you can update them with firmware. So that's been a huge help. All right, Dolby decides we're going to add some more stuff. Dolby Digital Surround EX. And basically, it adds, this is for home, it adds a back channel in the back. You could do it with 2, but they're playing mono. And it's a matrix signal, it is not discrete. So it's actually mixed in with the left and right surrounds.
So is it ProLogic for the mirror?
Kind of, yeah. But it doesn't roll off the top end. All right. How many of you are familiar with this format? I love this format. This is a version of CD. And it's very exciting. The trouble is it never went anywhere. But I'm still buying. I'm into classical music, which you'll discover. And the European record manufacturers and the Asians basically fell in love with this, and certain labels record in SACD. SACD is unique in that it's not playable. An SACD disc by itself is not playable in your car CD player or in a standard CD player. So what they did, it's dual layer on most of them. One layer is the same music in stereo, playable on any CD player ever built. If you put it into a SACD player, and the player we're going to be using is a combo player, it'll play the SACD layer, and most of them have a stereo version for the guy who hates surround, and a 5.0 or 5.1 version if it was recorded in multi-channel. So what Neil's going to do is we're going to play a little bit of a recording that came out a couple of years ago. You may not like classical music, but please, it's not going to be very long. This is a section of Sibelius' Fifth Symphony, and it's just a couple of minutes, and it's SACD Surround 5.0. Doesn't have a separate low frequency effects channel, and a lot of the classical may not. So we'll be using this speaker from Klipsch, that one, center channel, and the 2 on the outside, on the back side. Okay?
Along with the subwoofer.
Oh, yes, we have an SVS subwoofer up front. Notice the bottom left, Super Audio CD. For me, that's goosebump time, but if you're not into the music, it probably is meaningless too. But did you get the sense of hall and dynamic range? Difference between the soft and the loudest things that you can hear. All right. Again, our industry loves to kill itself. Another format. DVD audio, based on the DVD format. SACD was based on CD, disc. This is based on the DVD format. This pretty much died. You may see some around, and a lot of the players that are universal will play them. But again, there isn't hardly anything done in this today.
Pink Floyd just put one on.
Pardon?
Pink Floyd just put one on.
In DVD 8,
What is it?
I think it's SACD. Because a lot of Pink Floyd stuff was re-released in SACD, and they are fantastic. I met the guy who mixed the stuff. It was something else.
One of the primary things too we used to hear in regards to DVD-A, and one of the selling points and one of the purchasing points for a lot of people on SACD was the fact that they could buy one disc and play it in their car. A few years back, Acura had DVD audio in their vehicles, and you could play a DVD audio piece. But people like when they take a music format to be able to switch back and forth. So that was one of the bigger things in SACD.
Now, Dolby Pro Logic 2. Jim Fosgate, again, this comes back to the Peter Schreiber patents. Jim Fosgate develops a device that allows 5 separate full frequency channels from an upmix in stereo. And this was, some people you hear this, a game changer. It really was. It was so good that Dolby Pro Logic licenses it. Dolby licensed it for Dolby Pro Logic 2. And Jim Fosgate probably didn't have to work after that, but he was quite the engineer. Dolby Pro Logic 2X. It takes stereo, up into stereo to 5.1 or 6.1, 7.1, and you see the different speaker configurations. Most of the gear today have all these settings on them, and you choose to use them or not.
Give it a second, we'll go away.
Now, now we're getting into what we're dealing with today. Dolby developed Dolby Digital Plus, which is a format that it uses the full-range channels, but it's lossy, which means it's compressed. And we'll get to where it's used. And at the same time, they developed Dolby True HD, which is uncompressed, and what you're hearing is the master, whatever the master was. Well, they were designed to be used with this new format called Toshiba HD DVD. They were the primary company behind it. It was high definition video with great sound. There's a machine up here. And for those of you who are, I've got a movie here. It's factory sealed. All right.
Any offers?
The player was a terrific DVD player. But we got to have confusion. Sony and their group comes out with Blu-ray. So for 2 years, we carried both because we didn't know what direction it was going to go. And both formats, when you bought the machine, you generally got a bunch of movies. Then, we went to CES, and literally overnight, Warner Brothers and Toshiba capitulated. And I've heard stories, and I don't know if they're true or not, I tend to think they are, that a lot of money changed hands, and Blu-ray became the format. So as a retailer, we sold a lot of HD DVDs, and we sold a lot of Blu-ray. What we did, we sent a letter to every customer that had an HD DVD player and offered full value, but you had to return the machine and the movies towards a Blu-ray player. 3 people took advantage of it. And the reason was, I think, the player was so good as a DVD player. And remember, DVD still was a main format at the time, because there weren't a lot of movies yet. Another ProLogic 2Z. And this one simply added front height speakers. Now, are you getting the sense of more speakers? Okay. '12, in the theater, first Dolby Atmos movie was Disney's Brave. And now we enter the era of immersive audio. And this is the inside of a theater, and if you'll notice, speakers above, and then you have speakers all around. Now, October of 2012, I happened to be in San Francisco for a meeting, and they had an evening at Dolby Labs, and my wife and I went, and we spent an hour with the guy who developed Dolby Atmos and got the whole pitch. And my wife, who, I said this before, she could care less about most of this stuff. Not unusual. They just want to hear what it does. They don't want to mess with all the gear. And at the end of the demonstration, she goes, wow, it was very exciting. So the only question was, when were we going to get it at home? Well, before we got it at home, how many of you have heard of Blu-ray audio?
What's on Blu-ray audio?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Blu-ray audio is obviously a version of Blu-ray video, but with no video information. It is a high-resolution music format, like SACD is a high-resolution format. What do I mean by high resolution? The fact that it can go back to the original master. If you think a CD sounds good, that CD may have been compressed a little bit. You may not be hearing what's on the original master. Well, now we can hear the master with SACD and with Blu-ray audio. The only question is, who's going to care? I care, but I don't know if the mass market cares because it's confusion again. So we're going to play just a 2-minute section of another classical piece. This is from the London Symphony Orchestra series. They have their own label now. And this particular performance, there's an SACD disc in there, which can be played in a car with CD, and then SACD multi-channel, and then a separate disc with Blu-ray audio. It's called High Fidelity Pure Audio, HF, whatever. About 2 minutes. You may recognize the tune. So much information. Is anybody into opera here at all? Okay. An opera series that was done in 1958 through 65, it's the Wagner Ring Cycle with Joe Schulte and the Vienna Philharmonic. It's considered to be the #1 classical recordings of all time. So the 4 operas were done between 58 and 65. Rheingold, Valkyrie, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung. And don't correct me, I don't speak German. But it's the Ring Cycle. When it came out on LP, regular records, I bought it. And we used it for demonstration because it used technology that hadn't been done before. And it wasn't a stage production, it was actually set up for listening as opposed to watching, because there wasn't such a thing back then. All right. Then through the years, when CD came out, I happened to be in Japan before they released CD in the United States, so I bought the whole set in Japan and bought a portable CD player, again, before we had CD over here. And I'm flying across the Pacific, coming home, listening to my favorite sections on headphones. And I'm hearing stuff, I turn around thinking that somebody was making noise behind me. Well, for the first time, I heard George Schulte, who was a conductor, who would jump on the podium, you hear it all. Then through the decades, they would re-release it in remastered versions. Well, it was the 50th anniversary recently, and they brought out a big commemorative edition with all sorts of pictures and books. And then the original 17 LPs now were put on 14 CDs. So they're in this book. Except there was one disc at the end. What do you think this is? This is all of them on one disc. That set costs $250 with all the stuff. You can buy the 14 CDs for about 50, but they've released this for 60 bucks. The problem with things like this is, what do you charge? Because 4 operas, lots of people, lots of orchestras. Anyway, for those of you who may want to, at the end, when everybody, if you want to sit, we'll play a couple of minutes of this, because this was demo material back in the 60s, and it's still demo material today. And I'll play a little of it for you. We'll blast you out of here if you want to stay. You'll have to leave. Then last August, we did, I say the world premiere of Dolby Atmos, immersive audio for the home. It's safe to say in the United States, at a retailer. And we set it up back there, and then in April, we gutted the Ultimate Theater Room, and now we have no more TMH system. We have one system based on Dolby Atmos, because it does all these neat things. And here we go. You can have overhead speakers, or we're now going to play you, and this room is a crummy room, because what kind of ceiling do we have? Drop ceiling. There's another way of doing it, and that is using Dolby Atmos enabled loudspeakers. Clips just came out with a speaker that has the enabled speakers built in. So this reflects off the ceiling. And then in the back, we're using a pair of small speakers, and we've got this ugly looking thing sitting on top. The Klipsch enabled separate speakers were out of them. So we're using a definitive version, which will work just great. And this is going to be a short demonstration of Dolby Atmos. Again, immersive audio.
Right now, you're listening to where cinematic audio has been. Because we are so used to hearing sound this way, we don't notice that it is merely a fraction of what its potential could be. What if sound could be extraordinary again?
Engines are up and burning.
Opening main doors for secondary deployment.
What if sound could be captivating, subtle, authentic? What if sound could be deeper, more dimensional? There's no need to wonder, because you're listening to Dolby Atmos. With Dolby Atmos, audio can precisely move in any direction within this theater, whether the sound sweeps from the back to all the way in front, arcs overhead, or moves anywhere in between. Today, you will feel every dimension. How does that sound?
So even with the drop ceiling. There are way over 200 movies that have been done for the theater. We're at about 17 for home, and that includes a reissue of Gravity. We use Gravity a lot in the Ultimate Theater Room. The original version of this came out as a 3D version and a standard version with Dolby True HD. But it had a Dolby Atmos soundtrack in the theater. But the specs for home Blu-ray were not ready yet, so they released it. April this year, they brought out the Diamond Edition, and what ticked me off, it wasn't 3D, because I love 3D, and this is a fantastic 3D movie. But this is a Dolby Atmos version, and that's what we're using in the room. And then, I think some of you have seen the new Mad Max. It has a Dolby Atmos soundtrack, and it's spectacular. the new San Andreas, which is coming later this month.
Terminator Genesis will be in.
And Terminator Genesis, they all have Atmos. So where is it going with immersive audio? We'll be bringing in lunch in about 4 hours. I'm almost done. Thanks for putting up with this, by the way.
You're welcome, Bjorn.
Oh, yeah. Any questions about Atmos?
Is there like a giveaway?
You
want to give it away under my chair?
All right, other surround formats, just be aware of them. Odyssey. Odyssey is a company that licenses room correction, automatic room correction. Guess who's behind it originally? Tom Holman. He challenges students at USC to come up with a better way of making your room sound better and an easier way. Before we bring in a lot of test gear and set it up and get your frequency response correct in the room and all that. Well, now it's done automatically. Well, Odyssey decided to add something to 5.1 from Dolby and DTS. What does this look like?
It's bigger.
Well,
You
you notice the width, 2 width speakers and the 2 height speakers. G, 10.2. That's where it came from. All right? You'll run into this. It's on a number of the receivers. Then, you may read about this. This is RO3D. This is a European company, and the 3D has nothing to do with the visual. It has to do with 3D sound. I met the gentleman behind this, and he's brilliant. I finally heard it this last January at the Consumer Electronics Show. Very impressive. The problem is, it goes right against Dolby Atmos. And now we have confusion. And it's 11.1 in theaters. By the way, in Atmos, it can be like up to 64 channels in a theater. And I mean, it's amazing. RO3D and Dolby have a total disagreement on how movies should be mixed. RO mixes to channel, or whatever's there, something in the center goes equally. Dolby and Dolby Atmos changed everything. It's now object-based mixing. What do you do about all this space here? You can now place any sound anywhere in this space. And I think there's a theater in San Antonio because they made a deal with Barco, which makes projectors for theaters. And if the theater owner chooses to, he buys a package, and that's what you get. Well, now we have RO3D for the home. Notice this. That's called the voice of God. It's a speaker above. What I found inconvenient is their speakers set up for the height speakers. It's a great sounding system. If you choose to do it, there isn't a whole lot of software. It looks like Dolby and somebody else, which I'll show you in a moment. The current Denon and Marantz receivers, if you want RO3D, you pay $200 and it's a firmware upgrade. They didn't want customers to have to pay for it and never use it, but you can get it. What is missing so far? I've got Dolby, RO, DTS-X. They announced last December, they have yet to bring out the software, but the new receivers that are now being sold have provision for it when the firmware becomes available. There are 2 movies. One is already out, Ex Machina, and then a new one that was announced yesterday. I don't find this to be a problem because Dolby and DTS have been able to work on the same product for a long time.
And don't forget you got Dolby Atmos cell phones now.
Oh, I don't want to go there. But Chase said you have Dolby Atmos cell phones. Oh my gosh. All right. You all have seen this. What is it? Most of you probably think it's a surround system. Nope, it never was, never intended to be. What it is, it was Tom Holman, TH, the X stands for crossover. It also pays homage to what movie that George Lucas did? THX 1138, but it's really named after Tom. The problem was that they felt theaters didn't sound very good. The theater sound systems weren't very good. They put together a set of standards. Think of it as a good housekeeping seal of approval. It is not a surround sound decoding circuit. It simply rides with those formats. Any questions? And the home version, just to show you, this is from, you can tell, from the old days. The source, Dolby Digital, hits a decoder, and then it goes through the things that will make your room sound more like the mixing studio. That's the whole point.
Back in the 90s when THX first started bringing out their format, I'm gonna call it, it was a thing to buy. If a movie came out, if it was THX certified, that was what you wanted.
Yeah,
And
because
that's what they would emphasize.
it was a quality issue.
But now, you don't hear THX at
Well,
all.
they're involved in car stuff, they're involved in all sorts of things. Can you do a home theater system better and not have THX involved? Yeah. But if you do a THX system, for it to be truly a THX system, it has to meet certain standards, the speakers, the whole thing, okay? It was a good thing. I'm full of stories, as most of you know. Oh, there's one other thing here. And that is, can you get Dolby Digital Surround or DTS Surround from a single speaker array? The answer is it as good as a 5.1 discrete system? No. This was the first. This was a Yamaha YSP1, which has 40 plus speakers in it and uses technology that was developed in Britain. And when I first heard the prototype version of this from Pioneer, I went, you gotta be kidding me. No, this can't be happening. And then a year later, Yamaha is actually brings out the YSP1. And it allowed people to have a semblance of surround in Dolby Digital without having a bunch of speakers. This still sounds better. Okay, here's what I mentioned earlier. So Dolby Digital 5.1, the equivalent DTS 5.1, Dolby Digital EX. DTS, ES Matrix is that equivalent back. But now they brought out, and it wasn't used for very many movies, where the back channel wasn't matrix, it was actually a discrete channel. And then we have Dolby True HD, lossless, DTS Master HD. Dolby Digital Plus, by the way, is for streaming and broadcast, because they can't use True HD for that yet. And here's the equivalent, and then we just talked about these two. Okay. Don't buy them. This comes and goes. It's unbelievable, the people who fall for this. It even happened to me. I was filling up at a gas station and a van pulls up and they called me over and said, we've got some speakers. We work for Bjorn's. For real. And I just stood at the door and I went, really? I said, what's the problem? I'm Bjorn. And I started reaching in and the guy says, don't touch me, and he pulled out. But a lot of people fall for this and buy products that aren't worth anything. They sell speakers. Some people have bought boxes that have nothing in them but rocks. Just don't fall for it. Call us. Call us. The TV stations have even done reports on this. And so I want to thank James, who's in the back, and Joe Barrera, who's our facilities manager, helped put all this together. And Al helped with bringing some gear over, and Neil. Now, any questions? You guys have been great, but please fill out the survey. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, we'll email it to you. And any questions?